The grave was empty, but something answered. The coffin with no body. I never trusted quiet cemeteries. The kind where the birds forget to sing, where the wind brushes the gravestones like fingertips over secrets. You'd think silence would bring peace in a place like that. But it doesn't. It brings remembrance, and not all memories deserve to be dug up. The grave in question was not special, not in name, not in design. No angels, no marble inscriptions, no fresh flowers decaying with dignity. Just a rectangle of disturbed soil, gently sunken as the earth settled after the burial. A nameplate hammered hastily into a wooden marker, because the family hadn't decided on a stone yet. I remember when we buried him, Harold Fletcher, 79, stroke, they said, died in his chair, still clutching a book. I remembered, because it was a quiet service. Small, a woman in her 40s sobbing with something deeper than grief, something I now recognize as regret. One teenager stood next to her with arms crossed. No priest. Just me, my shovel, and the whisper of dirt returning to dirt. That had been 3 weeks ago. And yet, when I returned to the cemetery the night before last, I felt something wrong. Now, you might wonder why I was there after hours. Why I was walking among graves with only a lantern and a sense of dread. The answer is simple. I was summoned. Not by letter. Not by call. By presence. I woke up at 2:13 a.m., heart pounding, breath shallow, with a name in my mind like it had been carved into my skull while I slept. Harold Fletcher. I hadn't thought of him since I closed his coffin. But that night, the name pulsed behind my eyes, relentless. So I dressed, grabbed my lantern, and walked the path I knew by heart. The cemetery was colder than usual. Not in temperature, in memory. Like every stone was watching, every tree leaning in to listen. The grave itself was undisturbed. No sign of tampering, no broken soil, no marks. And yet, something was missing. I stood over it, trying to shake the feeling off, when I heard it. A faint, hollow knock. Not loud. Not repeated. Just once. From beneath the soil. I told myself it was nothing. An old root shifting. An animal below. But my hand moved toward the shovel anyway. That's the thing about being a gravedigger. Sometimes you obey instincts before logic has a chance to scream. The first strike into the dirt was jarring. The second one trembled up my spine. By the fifth, I was sweating. It took me hours to reach the coffin. The deeper I went, the heavier the earth felt. Not like weight, like memory. Like it didn't want to be disturbed. But finally, my fingers scraped the wood. I cleared the last of the soil away and stared. The lid looked untouched. I remembered sealing it myself. The brass handles still smudged from the funeral. The screws hadn't rusted. Nothing was out of place. Except for the feeling. I knelt, placed both hands on the lid, and waited. Silence. Then the knocks. From inside. I stumbled back, nearly toppling into the grave wall. My heart hammered like it was trying to claw out of my ribs. I held the lantern higher, as if light could protect me from something beneath. Then came the whisper, not from below. From within me. A voice I had not heard in decades. You buried the wrong part of him. I felt cold sweat gather at the back of my neck, because I knew that voice. It was my brother's. Dead. 21 years. I don't remember opening the coffin. I must have. The next thing I knew, the lid was beside me, resting awkwardly in the soil. But the coffin was empty. No Harold. No bones. No decay. Nothing. Except a small iron key resting on black velvet where the heart should have been, and a folded piece of paper beneath it. I reached in, fingers trembling, and lifted the paper. It was stiff with age, yellowed and brittle. I unfolded it carefully, expecting to see a message, something from the family maybe. A prank, a mistake, an old switch. Some ridiculous answer to an even more ridiculous night. But the note was not addressed to a family member. It was addressed to me. You never asked where I went that night. But you buried what I left behind. T. I dropped the letter. My hand shook violently. T. Thomas. My brother. Dead. Or so I thought. He disappeared when I was 22. Went out one evening after an argument with our father and never came back. 2 weeks later, they found his body at the river, swollen, cold. He was buried in a closed casket. I dug that grave myself. Now, all these years later, a note signed T lay inside the coffin of a man I barely knew. I grabbed the key. It was old, blackened with age, heavy, the kind that belongs to a cellar door, or an old trunk, or a lock you hope never to use. And then I noticed something scratched into the inside of the coffin lid. A symbol. 3 circles, overlapping, like a Venn diagram. At the center, a triangle, faint but deliberate. Drawn not with paint or pencil, but blood. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that symbol. I had seen it once, carved into the wall of our childhood basement. A symbol my brother drew obsessively. The summer before he vanished. I asked him once what it meant. He said, "It's where the voices live." That was the summer he stopped speaking to our father. The summer he stopped sleeping. The summer I stopped believing in coincidence. I dropped the lantern. Darkness swallowed me whole for a moment before I found it again, still burning on its side. I held it up, stared into the empty coffin, and asked aloud, "Where is he?" Silence. Then, the sound of breathing, not mine. Not behind me. From below. I leaned in, pressing my ear to the base of the coffin. Breath, slow, calm, rhythmic. As if someone lay in a room just beneath me. And then, a whisper. "You buried what was easy, not what was real." I scrambled out of the grave, threw the lid back on, covered it with dirt faster than I ever have in my life. My hands bled. My nails tore. But I didn't stop until the grave looked whole again. I didn't look back, not even once. Returned home at sunrise, hands trembling, the key cold in my pocket. I told myself to throw it away, but I see OULDN single quotes D. Instead. I cleaned it, placed it on my nightstand, and stared at it until I fell asleep. My dreams were worse than usual. I saw a door in the middle of the cemetery. Standing upright, unsupported, surrounded by fog. Behind it, I heard my brother's voice. "You buried the body, but the voice is still here." When I woke, the key was gone. In its place was a small pile of dirt. And at the center of the dirt, a single, red thread. Leading toward the basement door. And I haven't opened that door in 21 years. The voice, that wasn't supposed to speak. I stared at the red thread as if it were alive. It wasn't long, maybe 2 feet, but pulsed in the morning light like a vein stretched across the floor. One end curled on my nightstand. The other slithered across the room, down the hall, and paused just before the basement door, as if waiting to be followed. My mouth was dry. My hands still carried the memory of dirt under the nails, of the cold weight of a key that had now disappeared. And in its place, a thread, fragile, innocent looking, but unmistakably placed with purpose. I didn't move. I simply stared. For hours, I think. Until the sunlight dimmed into early dusk and the house returned to its natural silence. But it didn't feel natural anymore. It felt orchestrated. I stood slowly and followed the thread with bare feet. Every step was deliberate. My breath caught somewhere between my throat and my chest. As I reached the basement door, I hesitated. It was still locked, same rusted bolt, same splintered wood, same silence on the other side. And yet, it felt like something had shifted on the other side of the threshold. Not just the air. Time. The red thread disappeared under the crack of the door. Reached for the bolt. My hand hovered just long enough for me to remember. The last time this door had been opened was the night my brother vanished. It had been raining then. 2. I remember our father shouting. I remember Thomas going down the stairs. And I remember our father saying, "Don't you dare go after him." I didn't, and I've regretted it ever since. I pulled the bolt. It came free, easier than I expected, like it, too, had been waiting. The door creaked open, exhaling dust and memory into the hall. The thread descended the stairs, swallowed by the dark below. I turned on the light switch. Nothing. Of course. So I grabbed a flashlight, the same old one I used for late-night shifts at the cemetery, and stepped into the stairwell. Each step groaned beneath me, not with age, but with recognition. As if the house was saying, "You're finally back." The beam of the flashlight cut through the dark like a blade, revealing cobwebs, stacked boxes, rusted shelves, and footprints. Bare footprints. In the dust. Fresh. Leading deeper into the basement, toward the old furnace. I followed them. And then I saw it. A trapdoor I had never seen before. Set into the concrete floor. A metal ring handle at the center. The red thread led directly to it and disappeared through the sliver of a gap. I knelt beside it. It was cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from being underground. The kind of cold that belongs to things that should never be opened. I hesitated. Then I remembered the key. Gone? Taken? Used? I slipped my fingers into the ring and pulled. The trapdoor opened with a groan so deep it echoed up through the bones of the house, and beneath it, a staircase, descending into complete darkness. Stone walls. Wet air. And the faint sound of breathing. Again, not mine. Steady. Rhythmic. I aimed the flashlight down. The stairs curved out of sight. I thought of closing the door, locking it again, pretending none of this had happened, but that I heard it. A voice. Clear. Calm. My brother's voice. "Are you ready to hear what you buried?" My hand went numb. It wasn't possible. He was dead. I buried him. I cried over his casket. I lived with that ache like a companion for 21 years. But the voice was real. Not a memory. Not a dream. Present. I began to descend. Each step felt like a year peeling off my body. By the 10th step, I was no longer a man. I was a child chasing a brother into the dark. By the 20th, I was a memory unraveling. And then I reached the bottom. The air was thick. Not with dust, with grief. The flashlight flickered, then steadied. I was in a room. Stone walls. A single table at the center. And seated there, back facing me, was someone. Thin frame. Still. Listening. And beside them, resting on the table, was the iron key. My hand shook as I stepped forward. "Thomas?" The figure didn't move. I approached slowly, every breath loud in my ears. I reached the table, and what I saw was not a person. It was a coat, hung on an empty chair, positioned deliberately, with sleeves folded on the table. A paper beneath it. And the key. I lifted the paper. It was a page from our childhood Bible, the one our father made us read from every Sunday. But the page was defaced, crossed out, scribbled over, except for one line, underlined in red ink, over and over, and the voice called out from the earth beneath him. I turned the coat around. And inside the collar, stitched with old thread, "We only die when we are no longer remembered." Then the voice came again, behind me. Not a whisper, not an echo, spoken, as real as my own. "Why did you let him bury me?" I turned. The flashlight flickered violently. In the corner of the room, a shadow moved, not stepped, shifted, as if it had always been there, waiting to be seen. I raised the light, but the beam stopped short, like the dark was swallowing it whole. The voice continued. "You knew he hated what I was. You saw what he did, but you said nothing." I backed against the table. "No, I didn't know," I whispered. But the voice laughed. Not cruel, hurt. "You always knew. You just didn't want to believe you were part of it." The shadow stepped forward, and I saw his eyes. My brother's eyes, but not as I remembered them. These were older, deeper, filled with earth and pain. "Where's your body?" I asked. He smiled. "You buried it. But you buried the version of me you were comfortable mourning." My knees buckled. I fell to the floor, gasping because deep down, he was right. I had seen the bruises, the fear, the way our father cornered him in rooms. I had heard things, and I had said nothing, because silence was easier. The shadow knelt beside me, took the key, pressed it into my palm. "Open your own grave," he said, "and see what part of you left inside." Then everything went dark. I woke up in bed, gasping, covered in dirt, the iron key on my chest, and on the wall, written in red thread, "You're next." The grave I wasn't supposed to dig. I woke with the taste of dirt in my mouth, it clung to my tongue like ash. My skin was slick with cold sweat, my sheets stained with streaks of soil. And there, resting on my chest like a weight that had waited 20 years to return, was the iron key. It hadn't rusted. It gleamed in the half-light of morning like something recently unearthed, as if the ground had finally exhaled what it was never supposed to keep. On the wall across from my bed, the red thread had reappeared. But this time, it wasn't a line. It was a word. You. 3 letters stitched in crimson fiber, as though the very house had bled it into the plaster. Beneath the word, a single arrow, pointing to the floor. And beneath the floor, I already knew. The grave I wasn't supposed to dig wasn't in the cemetery. It was inside me. But I couldn't make sense of what was dream and what wasn't anymore. The trapdoor in the basement, the room, the coat, the voice. Could it all have been some elaborate descent into madness? But then I looked at my hands. Under my fingernails was packed dirt. And in my hair, tangled like a web, a piece of the same red thread. No, it was real. Or real enough. I dressed in silence. I didn't bother washing the soil off. It felt wrong to wash away something that had clearly chosen to remain. I took the key. I followed the arrow back to the basement. The trapdoor was still there, open, the stone steps gaping like a throat, ready to swallow me whole. But when I descended, this time, the room had changed. Gone was the coat, the table, the stitched collar. In its place, a coffin. Wooden. Closed. Unmarked. But familiar. My breath caught as I stepped closer. I knew this coffin, the grain of the wood, the dark handles, the single crack along the right edge, a flaw I remembered cursing under my breath as I helped lower it into the ground. It was Thomas's coffin, the one we buried the day they pulled him from the river. The one I never opened. One I never wanted to open. It shouldn't be here, but it was resting silently in the center of a room that pulsed with quiet, ancestral rage. I approached. My footsteps were louder than they should have been. Each step echoed like a scream muffled behind old church walls. I placed my hand on the lid. It was warm, and then it breathed. The coffin breathed. A slow rise, a long exhale. As if something beneath the wood had been waiting for me to get close enough to feel it live. I stepped back, but the lid creaked and opened on its own. Inside was not a body. Inside was me. But not the man I was. It was the boy I had been. 10 years old, kneeling, covering his ears. Eyes shut, blood on his shirt, dirt on his face, whispering the same phrase over and over. I didn't see. I didn't see. I didn't see. I fell to my knees because I remembered that night. Our father. The basement. The sound of something breaking, not glass, not wood, something human, and me. At the top of the stairs. Not going down, not stopping it, just listening, and then choosing to forget. That version of me, that scared silent boy, had never left that night. He had been buried, sealed into a coffin, lowered into the dark beneath my own memories. Until now, the boy in the coffin opened his eyes, and they were not afraid. They were furious. "You let him do it," he said. "I was a kid. You let him. I didn't know what to do." "You didn't do anything." I shook my head, trembling. "I was scared. And so you buried me instead." The words pierced deeper than anything physical, because they were true. when my brother vanished, when our father drank himself to death 2 winters later, when the house became mine and the world moved on. I had chosen amnesia over confrontation, had buried the worst parts of myself and called it growing up. The boy stared at me, and then he began to fade. Not into dust, into smoke, into soil. As if he were returning to the ground that never truly let him go. In his place, on the velvet lining of the coffin, a single object remained, a mirror. Small. Cracked. I reached for it. And as my fingers touched the glass, I saw all of them. Faces. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Not strangers, not quite people I had buried, some from the cemetery. Some from memory. All of them watching me. All of them whispering my name. And then one voice rose above the rest. A woman. Familiar. Soft. And broken. You never asked why he made me leave. I gasped. Because that voice, that was our mother, and we never spoke of her. Not after she left. Not after father said she was unstable, unwell, unfit. Not after she disappeared from our lives and from the records. I thought she was dead. Now I wasn't so sure, because now the room was changing again. The stone walls shifted. The coffin sank. And a door appeared behind it. Black door. No handle. No hinges. Just a slit of darkness in the shape of an ending I never saw coming. The mirror in my hand pulsed with heat. And then cracked completely. I stood, weak. Trembling. The key in my pocket now felt cold again. But I knew what had opened. Not a coffin, not a house, a truth, one I had buried even deeper than Thomas, deeper than the boy I once was. It was her, and the door was waiting. The mother I was told to forget. They told me she left on a Thursday, that she packed her things in silence, didn't say goodbye, and vanished down the driveway without looking back. They said she'd had enough, that her mind had cracked, like a window under too much pressure, that people like her don't survive in quiet towns like ours. But that's not how I remember it, because I don't remember anything at all. No goodbye, no shouting, no suitcases. Just absence, a sudden void where her scent used to linger in the hallway, where her humming once slipped through door cracks like the last warm light of day, where the sound of her voice had once meant safety, then silence, and now, here, in this impossible chamber beneath the trapdoor of my basement, her voice had returned. Soft, grave, unforgiving. You never asked why he made me leave. Black door pulsed in front of me. Not open, not closed, just present. Like a wound that hadn't decided whether to bleed or scar. In my pocket, the iron key trembled, not vibrating, shivering. As if it too remembered her. I stepped forward. The mirror I had retrieved from the coffin had shattered completely, but I still held its frame. And in that empty frame, I saw something impossible. A hallway, not here, not now. From our childhood. Home. Wallpapered, dim, with the faint outline of a woman's silhouette standing at the far end, holding something in her arms. A journal? A box? A child? I couldn't tell. The image flickered, then vanished, and the black door before me hissed like it had inhaled all the air in the room. It began to open, not with hinges, with intent, peeling inward like burnt pages of a book, revealing only darkness, but a kind of darkness that pulled, that whispered, that knew my name before I ever spoke it. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me. There is silence, and then there is this silence so complete it makes your ears ring with phantom sounds, the click of your own pulse, the memory of breath, the echo of words never spoken. I stood in a black space that had no walls. No floor. Only weight. The weight of memory. And then, like a single match flickering in the belly of a cave, I saw her. Standing. Back to me. Hair long, threaded with gray, a dress I recognized from photographs my father burned in the fireplace. She didn't move. She didn't need to, because the moment I saw her, something in me moved. A thread I had buried so deep it had become part of my marrow. Mom? I said. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like a name I'd once called out in dreams, but never dared speak in daylight. She turned. Her face. It was hers, but older, weathered by silence, etched by time in a way grief always recognizes, even when logic denies it. But her eyes, they weren't angry. They weren't warm. They were tired. You didn't forget me, she said. You were made to. I tried to speak, but my mouth filled with the taste of dust. My throat dried. My knees buckled. But I didn't fall, because there was no ground. We were floating in the belly of something ancient and invisible. Memory. She stepped toward me. Her hands folded, wrists thin. She held no anger, but her presence. It was heavier than a tomb. Why did you leave? I whispered. Her eyes dropped. And for the first time, I saw shame. I didn't. He buried me in stories you were too young to question. Your father was very good at that. The room pulsed. And with it came images. Flashes. A door slamming. A woman's scream. A boy, Thomas, hiding under a table. Me. Looking through the cracks in the staircase. Watching. Not understanding. And then. A man. Our father, dragging a suitcase, tossing photographs into a fireplace. Sitting us down at the kitchen table and saying, "She's not coming back. And that's the last we'll speak of it." That was the truth I had buried under obedience. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know I had a choice. I tried to find you. I said. No, she replied. You tried to forget me so it wouldn't hurt. Her words were not cruel. They were clean. Precise. And they cut deeper than any blade. I looked down at my hands, covered in soil. Again. Always. Soil. I was never just a gravedigger. I was a gardener of silence, and she had grown roots in what I refused to say. She lifted something, a box, wooden, simple, burnt around the edges. She held it out to me. I hesitated. And she said, "This is what he never let you see." I took the box. It was cold, heavier than it should have been. I opened it. Inside. Letters, hundreds of them. Written in her handwriting. To me, to Thomas, to no one. He never gave us your address, she said, but I wrote anyway. I lifted the top letter, dated my 7th birthday. You smiled like the sun today. I could feel it from here. Another, when your brother calls you at night, listen. He's asking without asking. And then another, a photograph slipped free. Me and Thomas, in the garden, holding a watering can. She was in the background. Smiling. Unaware. The photo was being taken. I collapsed. Not physically. Internally. Because the weight of her absence had never truly left me. And now it had a name, a voice, a story, and stories never stay buried. The room began to tremble. She looked around, suddenly alert. He knows you found me, she said. Who? But I knew. Our father, dead for years, buried in the same cemetery where I worked. A grave I dug myself, but she shook her head. Not just him. The part of him you never buried. And then, the world cracked. A sound like splintering teeth. The walls, if they were walls, tore open, and something began to crawl through. Not a person, not a shadow, something older, something worn. As if pain had been given form and had come to collect a debt. My mother placed the box in my hands. You must go. I don't know how. She leaned in, and for the first time in 30 years, I felt her kiss my forehead. Soft, real. Alive. Dig, she whispered, where you buried your fear. And then she was gone, swallowed by a roar of blackness that screamed not in sound, but in memory. The letters burned to ash. The photograph dissolved. Only the iron key remained. And the words on the inside of the box lid. Open the grave that bears no name. I woke on the floor of the basement. The trapdoor above me creaked, and outside, rain began to fall. Steady. Insistent. A reminder. It was time. To dig. The grave with no name. The rain had shifted the earth. By the time I returned to the cemetery, the path was half swallowed by mud, and the stones looked like teeth in a broken jaw, some sunken, some cracked, all watching. I hadn't been back since the coffin opened. Empty. Since Thomas whispered from beneath. Since my mother's voice returned from a place I'd been told was sealed forever. Clutched the iron key in my fist like a wound. I refused to bandage. It pulsed faintly, not like an object, but like a heartbeat. Like it was alive. Like it had waited decades to be used where it was meant to be. The box was gone. The letters too. Nothing physical had followed me from that place under the trapdoor. But something had changed. I knew where to dig. Not from a map, not from memory. From absence. A place in the cemetery that had always made me feel uncomfortable. A gap between two graves. Unmarked, unused, uneven. We never buried anyone there. But the earth always felt tensed, like it had tried to open once, and someone had forced it shut. I stepped into the grass. The rain softened it beneath my boots. I dropped to my knees and pressed my hand against the soil. It was warm, alive. I didn't hesitate. I began to dig. No funeral. No mourners. No name. Only the sound of wet earth opening, and my breath catching with every shovelful. The deeper I went, the heavier the soil became. It clung to my arms, my face, my thoughts. It was not resisting, it was asking, "Are you sure you want to remember?" Yes, I had to, because I could no longer live among graves I had dug with silence. After an hour, the shovel struck something hard. Not a coffin. Stone. I cleared it carefully. It was smooth. Polished. And when I wiped the surface clean, I saw it. 3 interlocking circles. And at the center, a triangle. The same symbol Thomas carved into our basement wall. The same one inside Harold Fletcher's coffin. The same one that seemed to follow me like a signature I never learned to read. There was no name. No dates. Only the symbol. And a keyhole. My hand moved on its own. The iron key slid into place with the ease of destiny. I turned it. And the stone shifted. Not slid. Open. It rose slowly, as if pushed by breath, not gears. Beneath it, a staircase. Stone, narrow, steep. And the scent that rose was not of decay. It was of memory. Of something long withheld. I descended. My lantern flickered. The walls pulsed with faint carvings. Names scratched into the rock in dozens of different hands. I saw mine. I saw Thomas's. I saw hers. My mother. The hallway ended in a door. Wooden, old, covered in mirrors. Hundreds of tiny mirrors. Each one cracked differently. I approached. In each mirror, a different version of myself. Angry, frightened, cold, silent. Grieving. 9 years old. 22. 50. I raised the lantern. The door opened. Inside was a study lined with books, photographs, letters, old furniture covered in sheets. And in the center, a chair. Facing the other direction, a single light above it, and the sound of breathing. I stepped in. The door closed behind me. I didn't flinch. I crossed the room. Each photograph I passed showed a moment I thought had been lost. My mother holding Thomas. Me and Thomas playing chess in silence. Our father, with a look I'd never seen before, frustration mixed with fear. At the chair, I stopped. The breathing continued. I reached out, touched the fabric. Spoke. Double quotes. Dad. Silence. Then the chair turned, but no one was sitting there. Only a suit, laid out. Neatly. Shoes, polished, gloves folded, a hat resting on the seat and pinned to the collar. I was never the man you remembered, just the story you were given. The breathing stopped, and the walls began to change. Photographs burned away. Books turned to ash. The light overhead flickered, then exploded, and I was left in complete darkness. Only the suit remained, and a final note tucked into its pocket. I read it in the dark. fingers trembling. There's no grave deep enough to hold the truth forever. You must bury what was buried in you. Then I heard it from behind me. A voice that was not a whisper, not a scream, but me. You already dug it. And I turned to face what I had left in the ground so long ago, the man I chose not to become. There was no light left in the room, only the suit. And the breath behind me, not air, not sound, just presence. I didn't want to turn around, because I already knew what I would see. Not my father, not a ghost, not a monster. Me, the version of me I had managed barely to avoid becoming. I turned, and there he was. Standing. Same height, same frame, but everything colder. A face carved from restraint, not love. Hands that curled like fists even when relaxed. Eyes that had forgotten how to weep. He wore the suit that had been laid out in the chair, and it fit him perfectly. I stood there, face to face with the man I feared was always hiding beneath my skin. He tilted his head slightly. Not curious. Judging. You came all this way, just to pretend you're different. He asked. His voice was mine, but heavier. A tone that had been sharpened by years of silence, expectation, and cowardice dressed as control. I'm not you, I said. He smiled. That's what he said too. He stepped closer. You buried your guilt in graves you were paid to dig. Called it service. Called it atonement. You pretended every coffin was a confession. He raised a hand, pointed a finger at my chest. But you never dug your own. I've tried. You've avoided. He circled me slowly, like a vulture that wore my skin. You watched him hurt Thomas, heard your mother's voice break, felt the weight of every lie he fed you, and you sat still. I clenched my fists, because I was a child. He stopped. Behind me. His whisper slid down my spine. You're not anymore. I turned to face him again. What do you want from me? His expression didn't change. You already know. He pointed to the ground between us. The stone shifted, and a hole opened. Small, perfect, just big enough for one man. At its base, a mirror. Not broken. Pristine. Waiting. The voice inside me, the part I had kept locked behind excuses, spoke before I could stop it. That's where he left you. That's where you left yourself. I fell to my knees. Tears I hadn't cried in years burned down my face. I looked into the hole. The mirror stared back, and in it, I saw every version of me that had ever walked away from truth. The boy who didn't speak up, the teen who laughed off pain, the man who told himself that distance was safer than honesty. They looked at me. And whispered, finish it. The other me, the man in the suit, reached into his coat, pulled out a shovel, and placed it beside the grave, then vanished. Gone. Not with a scream, not with a fight. Just gone. As if he was never real to begin with. Or worse, as if I had made him real. I sat there alone, in the silence of that hidden chamber. No air. No sound, only the weight of responsibility. I picked up the shovel, and I dug, but not to bury. To make space. Because for the first time, I wasn't hiding something. I was letting something out. Fear. The shame. The legacy of a man who taught me to fear softness and call it survival. I dug until my hands bled. Until the mirror cracked. Until the voices inside it went quiet. And then, the hole was full, not of earth. Of truth. A place inside me that could finally hold it. I stood. Shaking. Exhausted. But whole. As I turned to leave, the chamber behind me faded, not into darkness, but into lightless stillness. The kind that follows a final breath. The kind that doesn't haunt, only watches, back through the hallway of mirrors, back through the staircase, hidden under the unnamed grave. Back into the rain. The cemetery was silent, but different. Lighter. As if something had been removed or released. I walked home under gray skies. And for the first time since I was a child, I wasn't followed by footsteps that weren't mine. The weight that didn't leave with him. They say when you confront your past, the weight disappears. But they're wrong. It doesn't vanish. It changes. It shifts its shape. It stops lurking in corners and begins sitting beside you, silently, like an old companion who no longer needs to whisper. It breathes with you, it waits, it watches, but it no longer hides. I came home from the cemetery soaked in rain and silence. I had dug a grave that was meant for truth, not bone. And yet, the air in the house felt heavier than before. Not haunted, just occupied. I undressed slowly, dirt caked to my skin like memory, refusing to let go. In the bathroom mirror, I didn't recognize myself at first. I saw the lines that had deepened over the years, the gray threading through my beard, but most of all, I saw my eyes. They no longer avoided contact. They looked back. Steady. Alive. But behind that stillness, something lingered. A question I couldn't yet form, a truth not fully uncovered. I bathed. I slept. And for the first time in months, I dreamed of nothing. No shadows. No voices. No trapdoors. Only silence. And when I woke, I found something waiting on the kitchen table. A cup of tea. Still warm. Steam rising. But I had made no tea. I hadn't even filled the kettle. I stood frozen. The air in the room had changed, as if it had exhaled just moments before I arrived. Beside the cup lay a note, folded twice, blank on the outside. Inside, the weight didn't leave with him. It stayed to see what you'd become without it. No signature, just a faint imprint, the outline of a handprint in tea-stained parchment. A child's hand. I touched it, and a single memory exploded behind my eyes. I'm 6. In the backyard, digging with a plastic shovel, trying to make a tunnel deep enough for ants to hide in. I find something, a small wooden box. I call out. Thomas runs over. We open it. Inside is a note, scrawled in my mother's handwriting. This is where you put the things you're not ready to feel yet. I don't understand. I laugh. Thomas nods slowly, and we bury it again. The memory fades, and suddenly, I understand. There were more graves. Not just in the cemetery, but in our house. In the yard. In the walls. My family had buried memory in places that wouldn't be searched. They didn't erase things. They hid them. And now, the earth was giving them back. I grabbed my coat and went into the yard. It was early. The fog still clung to the trees like old cloth. I walked to the far corner, where the grass grew uneven, where no one ever stepped, and I knelt. I dug. Bare hands. The earth was soft. Too soft. Within minutes, my fingers struck wood. A small box. Weathered. I opened it. Inside, a photograph, torn. My mother, smiling beside a man who wasn't my father. A pair of tiny shoes, Thomas's, and a tape. An old cassette labeled The Last Night. I stood there, heart pounding, because this wasn't just forgotten. It was hidden. By someone who wanted the story to be one way, his way, and for years, it had worked. I carried the box inside. Found my old cassette player, pressed play. The tape began with static. Then voices. My father, angry, low, slurred. My mother, pleading, controlled, resigned. Then, Thomas, I saw you. You can't keep saying I didn't. A loud crash. A scream. My mother, crying. A door slamming. Then silence. Then a sound I never forgot. The creak of the basement door. Opening. And closing. I stopped the tape. I couldn't breathe. This was the night he disappeared. Night our father said nothing happened. But the tape remembered. And now, so did I. I wept. Not like a release, but like a door opening in the chest. One that had stayed locked long after the lock rusted shut. Because grief doesn't end. It changes shape. It stops being loud and becomes presence. The weight didn't leave with him. It stayed to see who I'd become without its shadow. And now it was watching, not from the corners, but from within. That night, I returned to the basement. The trapdoor was sealed again, but the key was still in my pocket. And this time, it was warm. Not cold. Not heavy. Familiar. opened the door dot and descended, but there was no coffin now dot, no alternate self, just a chair, and on the chair, the box I had just unearthed, already open. Beside it, a piece of paper, this one in my brother's handwriting. You can't bury things just because they hurt. They grow roots. And eventually, they come back looking for you. I sat dot and I stayed there for a long time. Not digging dot, not hiding dot, just breathing dot with the weight dot, the one I no longer feared, because it was mine, and it had waited for this. The roots beneath the house. The floorboards had always creaked the loudest near the hallway closet. Growing up, I thought it was just uneven foundation, or the old house settling in protest every time my father stomped across it. But now I heard something else in those groans, a tension, a presence. Something beneath that wasn't just shifting. It was listening. That night, after the basement had gone quiet and the old tape stopped spinning, I stood in the hallway and pressed my foot against the third board from the left dot. It breathed. Not air. Not dust dot. It gave. Just slightly, like it had lungs. I dropped to my knees and traced the seam with my fingers. There, a slight indentation. A groove. A lock. But not one meant for keys. A symbol dot, 3 circles, once again, faintly carved into the wood. At their center, the triangle. Burned into the grain as if pressed by a branding iron. That same shape had followed me from grave to grave, room to room, memory to memory. It wasn't just a mark dot, it was a map dot, and now I had reached its center. I pressed my palm against it. Wood responded with a click, soft, almost reluctant. The floorboard lifted. Beneath it, dirt dot, not crawl space dirt. Turned earth dot, fresh dot, waiting dot. I dug with my hands. I didn't stop to think. My body already knew the rhythm, and after maybe a foot, a hollow sound. Knuckles against wood dot, another box, smaller than the last, wrapped in cloth, bound with twine. And on top, an envelope with my name, not scrawled dot, written dot, with care. To the one who stayed. I sat on the floor and opened it. Inside the box, a newspaper clipping. Local woman declared missing. Family refuses comment. A lock of hair, braided, gray, a rosary, snapped in two. A piece of a child's drawing. Torn, the corner read, to mom. And beneath it all, a letter from her dot, my mother, written apparently after she left or was made to leave. I read it slowly. The ink had faded, but the voice behind it hadn't. I left parts of myself under this house, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. He told me silence would protect you, that if I stayed quiet, you'd be safe. But silence rots, just like bodies. It doesn't shield, it buries. If you're reading this, you've dug far enough to remember what he tried to erase. There are things beneath us that don't sleep, even when we do. There are roots here, not of trees, but of truth, and they are hungry. I placed the letter down, and suddenly, I felt it, a tremor, beneath the house, a pulse, not from plumbing or old wood, but from something deeper. I stood and placed my ear to the ground, and I heard it dot, whispers dot, dozens dot, maybe hundreds, not screams. Not cries dot, whispers dot, layered and woven together. Like roots in soil. Some I recognized dot, my mother, Thomas, even my own voice, younger, uncertain, pleading dot, then others dot, strangers dot, names I had read on grave markers. People I had buried. Stories I had never asked to hear, but they had heard me dot, and now they were responding. I opened the trapdoor again, returned to the basement, but this time, the room below had changed. There were no mirrors dot, no chair dot, only roots, twisting through the walls like veins, wrapping around the stone like ancient fingers. They pulsed with memory, glowing faintly, whispering, reaching dot in the center of the floor. A hole dot, not man-made, not natural dot, something between dot. It pulsed with a dim, red light, and at the edge, the symbol again, 3 circles, a triangle, but now, Something new, a crack running through it, like it had been broken, like something had escaped. Step forward, heart hammering. And from within the hole, a voice rose, not angry. Not kind. Just truthful. We were never buried to rest. We were buried to be forgotten. The ground shook. The roots stretched. And the walls began to whisper. Louder. Names. Dates. Confessions. They poured out of the walls like old blood, slow, deliberate, undeniable. And then a face emerged from the roots. Not physical. Etched. It was his. My father. Not as I remembered him in life, but twisted, stretched by the weight of everything he'd buried in us. In me. He opened his mouth. And spoke. You found what I couldn't destroy. The roots writhed. The room cracked. The air turned sour, like mold and regret. I stepped back, but the ground grabbed me, pulled me toward the hole, and just before I fell, another voice called out. Clear. Strong. Thomas, don't go into his grave. It's not yours. I froze. The earth stopped shaking. The roots recoiled. The whispers quieted. And in that stillness, a realization dawned. The weight wasn't mine to carry. It was his. My father's. But he had passed it down like inheritance, like tradition, and I had accepted it for too long. I stood, faced the roots. The hole. The symbol. And I said one word. No. The ground trembled. Cracked. Then stilled. The red light flickered and went out. I was left in darkness. But this time, it didn't frighten me. I climbed the stairs slowly, closed the trapdoor behind me. And sealed it. With the key. Then I took the key outside. And buried it. Not to forget, but to finish, because the roots beneath the house no longer owned me, and what once grew in silence had now heard me speak. The door that no longer opens. It rained for 3 days after I buried the key. A steady, soft rain, not cleansing, not dramatic, just present. As if the sky was mourning something that had been named aloud. The soil around the house grew thick, black and heavy. The trees stood still, their branches low like tired arms. And for the first time in years, I stayed inside without pacing. The trapdoor remained, sealed. The roots had quieted, but the echo still lingered, not loud, not haunting. Just there. In the corners, in the floorboards, in the way the house seemed to exhale after every step I took. I knew what it was. Residual memory. A presence left behind not by ghosts, but by repetition. Grief, repeated long enough, becomes ritual. Silence, practiced often enough, becomes a kind of religion. And I had worshipped both for most of my life. That morning, I stood before the hallway closet, the place where it all had begun. The place where the third floorboard had opened and revealed the final box. I half expected it to still breathe beneath my feet, but it didn't. The house had gone still, not dead. Resolved. And yet, one more door remained, one I hadn't thought of in years, one I had forgotten on purpose. The attic. I hadn't been up there since the week after the funeral. Not Thomas's, our father's. I remember avoiding it even then. The smell of dust and wood, the creak of the ladder, the single bulb that flickered like it had secrets of its own. He kept things up there. Things he didn't want us to find. Boxes marked with strange codes. Old notebooks with pages torn out. Artifacts of a man who needed to control the story, even in death. But now, that door, the one in the ceiling, felt like it was calling me. Fetched the ladder, unlatched the lock, and climbed. Slowly. Deliberately. Each rung felt heavier than the last, not with gravity, with remembrance. I pushed open the hatch. The smell hit first. Old wood, stale air, and something else. Faint. Metallic. Like blood and parchment. The bulb still hung from the ceiling. Pulled the chain. It flickered, then stayed on. The attic was exactly as I remembered it, and nothing like it. Dust covered everything in thick layers. But some of the dust had been moved, as if fingers had trailed across surfaces recently. The boxes were stacked in tight rows, labeled with years. But one box sat alone in the corner, apart from the others, smaller, black, locked. I approached it. There was no keyhole, only a symbol burned into the lid, 3 circles, 1 triangle, and this time, a line drawn through the triangle, crossed out. Severed. Broken. I knelt. And the moment my fingers touched the lid, I heard it. There is one more door, but it does not belong to you. The voice was not behind me. It was within me. My own. Older. Not the man I was now. The man I might one day become. If I chose to keep going, I lifted the lid. Inside. Not objects. Memories. Pages torn from journals. Letters I had written and never sent. Notes scribbled in margins of books. Photos I had ripped apart in anger. And at the very bottom, a mirror. Not broken, not cracked. Clean. Small. It reflected only one thing. Door. White, plain, closed, and it pulsed. I touched the glass. And for a moment, I was no longer in the attic. I stood in a corridor I had never seen. Narrow. Endless. Lit by a single line of pale light above. And at the far end, the door. Just like in the mirror, I walked. My steps made no sound. Time didn't pass, or maybe it passed all at once. Reached the door. There was no handle, only a word carved into the wood. Decide. I placed my hand against it. It was cold. It didn't open. It didn't resist. It just waited. You've seen what happens when you bury things. You've met the weight, spoken to the silence, dug the graves. Now you must decide. Do you open this and begin again, or walk away and let it all be buried for good? I wanted to know what was behind it. Desperately. But for the first time I didn't need to see it, because I understood. Some doors are not meant to be opened. Some are meant to be walked away from, with knowledge. Because the lesson was never what lay behind them. It was knowing you could open them, and choosing not to. I stepped back, and the door faded. The hallway dissolved. The attic returned. I sat there, the mirror in my lap, heart slow, breath even. The house didn't shift, the bulb didn't flicker. Nothing called out, because it was done, truly done. I placed the mirror back into the box, closed the lid. And for the first time in my life, I locked a door from the outside, not to keep something in, but to let myself out. The grave that answered back. There's something peculiar that happens after you close the final door. The world doesn't go quiet. It listens. Not with ears, but with presence. Not for answers, but for the absence of them. And when it hears that, you've chosen silence not as avoidance, but as peace. It speaks back. Not with words, with weight. Not the kind that crushes, the kind that grounds. I sat in the attic long after the vision faded, the mirror back in its box. The door in the corridor gone. There was nothing left to dig. No root left to unearth. No memory screaming from the walls. Just me. Still here. The man who once buried silence like a calling card. The man who now carried truth like a stone polished in the palm. Heavy, familiar, but no longer sharp. That evening, I walked the cemetery again. It had become a habit, but not the kind formed from grief. A ritual of acknowledgement. Each grave now had a voice I could finally hear. Not whispering. Just present. The earth no longer resisted my footsteps. It welcomed them. Even the unnamed grave, the one I had opened, descended, wept over, and resealed, was quiet now. Not dead. Settled. I stood there, hat in hand. I didn't speak, but it did. Grave. The ground, the echo beneath. It answered. With presence. A stillness that spoke a language I could finally understand. We are what we bury, and we are also what survives it. I knelt and placed a hand on the soil, felt the slow heartbeat of memory beneath it. Felt the pain, the love, the failure, the redemption, all of it pulsing through the ground like heat through stone. I had feared graves all my life because I believed they ended things, but now I knew They contain. They hold what we're not ready to carry, and when we are, they open. Not to swallow us, but to return us to ourselves. I stood again. And for the first time, I walked away from a grave, not with dread, not with guilt, but with quiet, the kind that doesn't hide, the kind that frees. The next morning, I found the house had changed. The floors didn't creak as loudly. The basement felt still. The attic, sealed. And the mirror in the hallway, the one that once reflected shadows behind me, showed only me. Now. No boy. No father. No silence screaming in the background. Just a man. Tired. But whole. I made tea, watched the sunrise, and thought about Thomas. About my mother. About the version of me who once dug to forget. He was gone now, but not erased, just buried. Where he belonged. Not beneath shame. Not beneath denial, but beneath acceptance. And sometimes, on certain mornings when the fog hugs the trees and the dew clings to the glass, I hear a sound in the yard. Not footsteps, not whispers. Just the soft, steady sound of something settling into place. Like the world turning a page, like a chapter ending. Not with finality, but with rest. And in that silence, the grave answers. Not with fear. Not with darkness. But with closure. Because this time, I didn't dig to forget. I dug to remember. And memory, when carried honestly, stops being a tomb and becomes a home.